with our that, right?
You know, Arla, that would be a great thing to just check out and make sure that you can share screen. I think it should work. Hey, everyone is jumping on. Oh, excellent. It does. As we're jumping on to the Zoom space, welcome to our second Tuesdays. And since our guests today and conversation partners are from Church Pension Group that takes a lot of risks and who we sort of the church invites to take risks with us, we thought we might, just as an icebreaker in the chat box, stir the pot by asking, who's somebody who's taken a risk on you? Maybe that's in your ministry, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's before your ministry began. Maybe that's a little bit of an act of Thanksgiving too in this holiday season. Who's someone who's taken a risk on you? I invite you to put your answer to that in the chat box.
Great question, Katie. Thank you for starting us out with that. Would you mind putting it in the chat so that everyone can see?
I will. So this icebreaker in the chat box, if you'd like to continue responding, who is someone who has taken a risk on you?
Nice, nice. Yeah, and perhaps as we come into this conversation, some of you are just going to get to know each other in this moment. Maybe as we come into this, you might bring the spirit of that realization with you into the conversation. It's a lovely gift to remember. Oh, yeah, there's that Bob Jewett who recommended me for ordination in the Diocese of Maine after three bishops in a row said, no, no, you're not called to the priesthood. You're called to wonderful things, but not priesthood in the Episcopal Church. So, yeah, so each of us has some version. Well, let's say, I hope that each of us has someone we can recall, and perhaps we bring the spirit of that person with us into the conversation today. So, welcome to each of you. Once in a while, I find it such a lovely gift to myself to go over there to the top right corner of Zoom and choose View and then set it to Gallery and see everybody's faces on the screen. It's so lovely. So I invite you to do that if you like. This is a public conversation in that it's being recorded, and we invite you to stay with us in this recorded session, knowing that after it's done, we will also turn off the recording and make space for a more intimate conversation that would get to the nitty-gritty of your local situation, if you like. We meet on second Tuesdays at 2, and we have for almost a decade, as a way of inviting the church at large to look over our shoulder at the conversations that we think matter. Sometimes it's the conversation that matters, and then sometimes it's the content or the topic at hand. I think today is going to prove to be both of those, and we're really glad to have invited two remarkable representatives of the church pension group to join us. And you all probably know you can find amazing presentations of the characteristics of the pension plan for clergy and lay leaders on their website and in their regular webinars. Today's a little different. We're going to start out with some grounding and some slides, but then this is really designed as a moment for us to interact with these two representatives I'm going to introduce in a moment, and really share our local contexts with them at a granular level, if you like, at a highly pixelated level, just to talk about what the realities are from our individual locations, our context. So, first of all, we're really glad you're here, and super grateful that you accepted the invitation to come join us. First of all, Arlette, for meeting with us ahead of time to talk about what we're trying to do here. And then um, I can't remember if it's Reverend Doctor or Reverend Mary Kate Wold, but we're really glad that you're here. I hope I didn't give you an accidental doctorate there.
And you gave me an accidental reverend too. I'm neither of
Oh,
those.
nice.
Actually,
Okay.
I have an honorary degree from Berkeley at Yale, so maybe that helps.
That's beautiful. Well, I revere you. How about that? In that sense, then you
Thank
are
you.
reverend
Thank
in
you.
my life, and you have been for years. So I'm really grateful that you were willing to come and
And
join
let
us
me say that you
today.
have a bonus because the Reverend Clayton Crawley, who had a conflict, had that conflict cleared just moments ago and has joined us too. So you get three of us for the
Beautiful.
price of two.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for being here. To their credit, let me say, I wish I could introduce you to each of the people on the call on this session today. This is a remarkable gathering, broadly representative of the networks that Katie, Steve Matthews, and I serve, both on the church planting side, or ministry development side, and on the redevelopment side, which increasingly is engaging people from other cultures coming here into our US cultures, and discerning together what it means to be the church, the once and future church that one of our venerated ones once described. So, really glad you're here. I'm grateful for your witness as you all, the three of you, navigate the church's way of being in the world while also keeping your ear to the ground about the way the Spirit is moving among us. I know all three of you to be deeply faithful people in those ways, standing in that space between cultural mores and how Spirit's showing up. And so we're really eager to hear you, and would love to have you start wherever you'd like to start, and then we'll come up with questions as you come along. So
Great. Well,
over
thank
to
you.
you.
First of all, I have to apologize for the view. I was scrambling to get on only to find that my desktop computer was not connected to the internet and we couldn't figure it out. So I'm on my iPad, which is a little bit of a squirrely view here, but apologies for that. We thought that maybe it would help to just give you a high level view of how we're thinking about our purpose and our vision at CPG. And I had just a few slides. This is not a big slideshow, but 3 or 4 slides just to kind of hold your attention when I walk you through how we think about our work at CPG. So I'll just go on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So when we think about why we exist as CPG, many years ago, when in the first couple of years that I came into CPG, we did a lot of work to think about our purpose, our vision. We used the Patrick Lencioni materials and basically jettisoned the word mission because his view was mission statements have become so gerrymandered and wordsmithed and that they basically become fairly ubiquitous, meaningless sort of, string of words. So he liked to think about purpose and encouraging his readers to think about what is the highest and most aspirational reason for your existence. And we debated that. And so we use the word purpose rather than mission typically at CPG. And we said our purpose is to exist to support the clergy and lay employees of the Episcopal Church in their calling to spread the gospel. So it's not our job at CPG to spread the gospel. We're very inclusive in terms of our employee base. We have people of all faiths and no faiths. So we're not specifically focused on spreading the gospel, but what I can tell you is, and of course, we have lots of Episcopalians and Episcopal priests and Christians and that within our employee base, but I can tell you that every single employee is singularly focused on pursuing this purpose and is devoted to this purpose. And if people aren't inspired by it, they very quickly self-select out of the organization. So regardless of religious beliefs, people all view that this is a very worthy purpose, and they come to us because we're a purpose-driven organization. I have breakfasts on a regular basis with new employees in the company, and the thing I hear most often is that they're attracted to CPG because of the high level of work and professionalism and a purposeful context. So want you to hear that. Once we start with our purpose, the broadest, most aspirational reason for being at CPG, we then go to next slide, which is our vision. And several years ago, 2015 to be exact, we coined our vision. And I had actually hired a consultant. I was very frustrated with our strategic planning process. And I finally kind of threw up my hands and hired somebody to come in to help me design a strategic planning process. And he heard me out and then he said, "I can't help you." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Well, you haven't articulated a vision for CPG. So how can I help you with the strategic planning process without having a vision to pursue?" And he said, "I know you have your own vision, but it's got to be embraced by the organization." So we went through kind of a 1.5 year planning process. It was really exciting and dynamic. We had, out of our 450-ish employees, we probably had well over 200 who got actively involved, whether it was on specific kind of task forces or participating in surveys and focus groups and that. So we were very aligned and bought in when we finally arrived at our vision. And we had 4 visioning teams. One of them looked at what are our current capabilities. Another looked at what are our client needs. Another looked at what are the mindsets in the organization, mindsets that actually help us meet our clients' needs or mindsets that might impede us. And then lastly, we looked at disruptors. What are things out there externally that could change, that would really turn us, kind of topsy-turvy in terms of trying to achieve our vision? Interestingly, we had a long list of almost 100 items, and at least 4 people noted pandemic, which we really kind of shoved aside and didn't focus on. But lo and behold, at least we thought of it. But anyway, where we landed is really looking at the core of who we are. And that is, and you see it on this slide, our clients will have the highest possible level of financial security in retirement. And that is not just standing alone. There's tension in the statement in a way that is consistent with exemplary financial stewardship on our part. We can't say yes to everything. We have to be here for the long term. We have to be thinking long term and very careful about the way we spend money. And then also consistent with the evolving needs of the church. So not sitting in an ivory tower saying, "Oh, I think the church should have this or that." It's really being out, listening, and that's what this meeting is about for us, really understanding what the actual needs of the church are, not what we would like to sell or what we would like to provide for the church. So that vision, which we see as kind of 15 years or so out in the future, that provides a beacon for all of our planning. So next slide. We pursue our purpose and our vision through 3 lines of business. And one is, of course, that core, that employee benefits business. The second is publishing, which is a little kind of off to the side, one would say, unexpected for a pension fund. But we've been in the publishing business since 1918, a year after we were actually founded in 1917. So long history in publishing. Interestingly, the publishing business, which was then the Church Hymnal Corporation, was given to us because it was seen as a cash cow. This would be a great gift for the pension fund. It's going to throw off a lot of money and therefore underwrite pensions for lots of clergy for eons to come. Of course, that's not the course that our publishing business or any publishing business has taken over the decades, but for many years that was in fact the case. And then lastly, our property and casualty insurance business. which also has been part of the company since kind of the late 30s or so. It existed as a company called the Church Fire Insurance Company that was outside the scope of CPG. And then in drips and drabs, the trustees gave the stock of that company to CPG. I think it was, from what I can tell, kind of a vanity play. There were owners of that business and trustees of that business who were also trustees of the church pension fund, and just thought it would be great if the church pension fund, we expanded our reach and had this other business. So when we talk about our vision, which is really focused on driving the highest level of financial security for our individual clients, you might say, well, publishing and property and casualty business, what about those? They are ancillary, but the way we think about them in the context of our overall vision is, number one, they can't be a drag on the vision. We have to make sure that they're financially sustainable and run with financial excellence. And number two, we're constantly looking for synergies. So when we think about financial wellness in publishing, we're thinking of, are there books we can publish that would help people think about financial wellness, emotional wellness, things that are very much within the scope of our benefits business. On property and casualty insurance, we have representatives out around the company, and they carry messages and crossover and bring messages back to us as they meet with vestries and other clients. So we're constantly seeking synergies. And even though these two businesses are not central to our core vision, they have been entrusted to us for many, many years. They're important to the life of the church. And we work hard to align them with the core work that we do. So they're not a distraction, but actually an enhancement to our work. Next slide. So when we think about planning, we take our vision and then we go into what we call our 3-year planning cycle. Some companies plan on the basis of 5 years. Some people plan on the basis of 3 years. We use a 3-year planning cycle. And then we set up what we call an objective. That's kind of putting a stake in the ground. If you think about our vision as a beacon with a road leading to it, you think then of our strategic objective as every 3 years we put a stake in the ground that gets us closer down that road to our vision. And then once we set that objective, we come up with large transformative bodies of work that we call strategic initiatives that will keep us busy for the next 3 years, achieving that objective. And then once we have those in place, that helps us each year set our goals for each year, because we know what the 3-year plan is, and then we kind of know how we have to pace ourselves over those 3 years. So we're just finishing up a 3-year strategic plan, and the objective for that 3 years was to be high performing in 4 areas. And those 4 areas were our operations, the products and services we provide for our clients, our relationships, not only with the church, but vendors and other stakeholders, and our people, the performance of our people. And we felt that and that built on kind of trying to drive excellence in the prior 3 years. So over 6 years, we feel that we have nailed this, but we don't want to rest on our laurels. That's we can't afford to do that. And we're in a mode of continuous improvement. So we knew part of the next 3-year planning cycle had to not kind of deep six a reference to all the great work that we've done, but you can see in this statement for 2025 to 2027 that we're going to continue to optimize the benefits of the work that we've been doing in operations, products and services, relationships and people. But what makes me really excited about this new 3-year objective that we've just nailed is the first part and the primary focus of our 3-year objective. We said once we've created this foundation where we feel that we're really operating on all cylinders, the company is strong in all of those 4 major pillar areas, now we can afford to spend some time on really looking forward. And we realize that the church is changing. I mean, CPG is changing. I have an executive leadership team of 7 people. In the last 18 months, I have 4 out of 7 have either or will retire before the end of the year, including Clayton Crawley, who is on this team. So big change in our own leadership at CPG. It's bittersweet because we are going to miss the people who've left, but the people who are already identified and poised to take their places are fantastic. So it's bittersweet in that regard. But the church is changing. We have a new presiding bishop. We have new leadership at many levels. The House of Bishops is a big, there's a big turnover in the last kind of number of years in that regard. But and we hear every time we're out in the church that the church is changing, the church is changing. So that means that we need to examine how we work at CPG, what we provide for our clients, and make sure that consistent with our vision, aligned with the evolving needs of the Episcopal Church, that we're really there. But we're blessed with a really fantastic research team headed by Matthew Price. And we have, I think, the best data in the church. We have expert people with PhDs and other high-level academic credentials who analyze that work and read patterns into the data that we've collected from the church. And so that's really a gift to us and a gift to the church, but it's backward looking. And we know the church is changing, and maybe in some predictable and maybe in some unpredictable ways. And so we hear a lot of anecdotes. So I can't tell you the number of times I'm out in the church where people say, in the next 10 years, all of our clergy are going to be part-time. Or in the next 30 years, 90% of our clergy are going to be bivocational. Or in 50 years, there's going to be a pension plan and no Episcopal Church. Well, those all come from people who believe what they're saying, but they are anecdotal. And we at CPG, being very data focused and methodical in our thinking, want to make sure that when we make decisions, we get universal respect. People may not like our decisions, but they realize that we put in that really difficult work to make sure that we understand the environment and we're making a decision with the best information we can have in the best interest of our clients. So what we've decided is that we're going to spend the next few years. It's not going to take quite that long, I don't think, but we're giving ourselves the next 3 years to come to a point of view as to what the evolving needs of the church are that are vision relevant for us. So we're not doing research for the whole church. It's not an expansive research project to tell the church what they're doing, but to the extent that changes in the church impact CPG, that is the work that we're doing. And by the end of this 3 years, we expect to have a point of view that we will articulate. We'll test it, and it'll be an iterative process. We'll probably have a straw man by sometime early 2026 that we'll take out and say, does this resonate? Here's the reason we're landed on this. What do you think? We'll probably come back and tweak it. And then by the end of the 3 years, we'll say, what are the big areas of focus that we need to have for the next 3 years to act on? And I was privileged to have lunch with Sean Rowe the week before his institution. And he talked about a similar project, but more expansive project that he is doing. So I'm really encouraged that we're going to be able to collaborate on this. And that will be, I'm sure there'll be ways we can assist him and certainly vice versa. But I'm really, really excited about that work. And so we are starting with a list of questions. Already when we started articulating this point of view work, people were quick to say, what if we offer this? What do we have to offer that? And I had to say, whoa, we're not jumping to solutions. We first have to interrogate the data, and, we have to be futurists a little bit. So we pulled back and we said, what are the big questions that we need to answer? We're still in the process of formulating those questions, but as of January 1st, we're going to be able to, January 2nd probably, hit the ground running. We're going to have those questions in hand. We're identifying various stakeholders we'll be meeting with and such. But there's no time like the present to start that work. So I'm so excited to be able to meet with you all today. I see Sunny here. I started learning about church planters on my first trip to the convocation several years ago, and the hard work that entails. I've heard from a number of church planters in Europe and otherwise since then, and I've asked questions like, could there be an affinity group, a Credo affinity group, for instance, for church planters? Would that be useful? We're in the process of thinking about what Credo is going to look like for the next 3 years, but questions like that. So you have a really unique and inspiring and difficult ministry, and Clayton and Arlette and I are here today to learn more about that. So I think you mentioned that you would have questions for us. So I definitely want to entertain those questions, and then I'll definitely have some questions for you too.
Oh, Thank you. What an amazing start. And thank you for naming the process by which you've come to this clarity that you're offering us today. Thank you for that. And I'm so glad we recorded this because I'm thinking about how we might use some of that process as a team responsible for church planting and ministry redevelopment as well. So thank you. How would you like us to address you as people unmute and speak up or
Mary Kate for me.
okay,
You
okay.
could call me Doctor or Reverend, but Mary Kate is probably legitimate.
Thank you. Thank you for your humor. I want to start by asking a question. This is a question about how do you see yourself intersecting with this possibility? Um, Often when we go out, people will say, how do we gather up the collective goodwill to follow the Spirit out into the world? And I will quote a poet, pilot, philosopher from 123 years ago who said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. And as we've gone around the church naming that and inviting people to give feedback and give us direct, possibilities, we often will hear really thoughtful leaders, many of whom are well known in the church, say, bishops and clergy and lay leaders will say, we think that the Spirit is up to something pretty wonderful, especially with the new cultures that are coming here on our shores, and that they are bringing a kind of leavening to us that will certainly change the church, but in some ways also make us a lively expression of the future possibilities. So there's this sense of anticipating a voyage, building a ship, and the prerequisite work of longing for the endless immensity of the sea. How do you all do that work in parallel with the church? How do you express that uh, tuning our hearts to long for the endless immensity of the sea by which we would eventually build a ship that's ready for it?
That's wonderful. I love that quote. Um, so I want to go back to the words of William Lawrence, who was our founder. A lot of people will say J.P. Morgan founded the pension fund. He was very instrumental in drumming up wealthy people who would donate money for the benefit of clergy. He was a devout Episcopalian, but our real founder was William Lawrence, who was a bishop from Massachusetts, very well-heeled family and well connected with the JP Morgans and other financiers of the world, and really made it possible. But he witnessed people, clergy, who were retiring into abject poverty, unless they were like him, who had family wealth from that. People didn't have pensions, and they would retire, and they'd have friends and family who might look after them for a while, but that would get old, and after a few years was not very interesting anymore, and the largesse would run out. Or equally seriously, people just refused to retire. They'd stay in the pulpit long after they were effective. So Bishop Lawrence had this audacious dream that there would be a mandatory pension system. The clergy would not have to negotiate parish by parish to get benefits, but would be, by virtue of becoming ordained and employed by the church, could have that, would be assured those benefits, which have now extended to healthcare benefits in addition to retirement. And his idea was that, number one, this wasn't out of pity. This was out of something that was contractual and would be owed to them by virtue of their work. And secondly, it would allow the ministers to minister, as he said. So free clergy from some financial concerns that would allow them to go about their good work. So I think we have to be conscious as we think of that yearning for the endless sea. It's like the body of Christ. We have a piece of that by the pension fund, but we have to be very conscious, because we're fiduciaries of monies that are given to us to use them for a specific purpose. We have to be very conscious of what body part are we and what is our role. So we join in that audacious dream for the church, but also are very conscious as fiduciaries as to what our role in that is. And we want to do what we do. We don't want to expand beyond our role, but we want to do what we do very, very, very well. So we stay within the bounds of what we've been called to do, and then do it with excellence. So I think in terms of joining the church in this, first of all, I think this point of view work is part of that. You know, I expect that this is one of many conversations we're going to have with people who are dreaming that dream of, you know, the wide open sea. And, you know, it's going to cause us to think dynamically about, so given our role in the church, do we have to tweak what we're doing, or are there things that we need to do differently to best equip people to jump on that ship?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for naming that. Inviting people, equipping people to jump on that ship. That's beautiful. And as we shift from a dominant culture denomination to a multicultural denomination, there are several processes of adaptation, which include getting over some of the racism that has bound us, that has kept us from acknowledging the giftedness often in front of us, getting over the ecology of value, a smarter friend of mine calls it, where some people are valued more than others. And, you know, Katie, Steve, and I are in a position of influence, but certainly no authority and power. And so we come at these questions quite honestly. You know, I can't change policy. I might be able to have influence on a diocese and the way they conduct themselves in relationship with a person of color representing another culture coming in to start a new congregation who's getting paid quarter time because, well, the diocese isn't sure if it's going to really go yet or not. So they're going to work time and a half to prove they're worthy of full time. And we're in the middle of figuring out, what does it mean to jump on that ship that has been built by the longings of many who are no longer with us, the prayers and hopes of those who have prayed before we got here? What does that mean? How do we bridge across that? That's a hard piece of our work, Mary Kate. And so it feels really good to hear you talking about this openly.
Yes, so diversity, equity, inclusion has been huge at CPG for a very long time. We actually included I think I didn't mention, but when we came up with our vision, we also came up with a series of what we call vision drivers, the qualities of the organization that would have to change, like going from reactive to proactive, or blurred mission to kind of clarity of purpose, and you know, that sort of thing. And one of them was to say, going from valuing DEI, which we have historically long before I arrived, to really leveraging it as a business asset. So that is one of our vision drivers. I think we do that extremely well within CPG. We have a very diverse group of employees and affinity groups, and very active. We actually had a webinar yesterday to delve into some survey results that we had that suggested that women and some people of color were experiencing CPG differently than others. And so we're building into our people strategy for the next 3 years ways to address those concerns. So certainly we live at CPG. Our board is also very active in doing its own work to make sure that all voices are heard around the table. But when it comes to our client base, I would, first of all, we are apolitical in every way. I mean, I like to say the little ditty, red and yellow, black and white, they are equal in a sight, blah, 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 blah. I always say every single client of CPG is equal to us. We don't care what your political affiliation is. We don't care where you are on the political spectrum. We don't care about race or ethnicity. We treat every single client the same. And that is really critical to us. And that we have the credibility and trustworthiness in the trust of our clients to know that we do that. We were asked by the church, by General Convention, and we presented a report that is still very compelling. I think we published the report in 2018 on to look at both lay employees and employees of different demographics. So we had a number of listening events with Asian clergy, Black clergy, women, Hispanic, and we came up with a lot of findings about what people's experience, clergy and lay employees of the church, are, we saw that our job was in having those conversations, which also helped us do our work better, but to be able to put a spotlight on those issues for General Convention, for the church at large. So you can find those on our website. There are two very substantial reports, but we, once gathering that information, we considered it our responsibility then to publish that work and name some areas where the church could actually do more work to level the playing field for clergy of all different demographics. So that's helpful. And I must say, as we think about our work, we think about the impact on various demographics, whether it's race, whether it's gender-based, whether it's urban versus rural. But as we think about how we design our products and services and that, we think about the impact on specific demographics. So it's very central and important to our work. And we're very active in groups like, the UBE and others, where we've more than once in the past few years been, named as an ally. So we're very, very proud of that. But that to us is that's our day job. I mean, we consider that just part of what we need to do naturally to be able to make sure that every single client is treated equally.
Thank you. Thank you. As we've been talking, people have been typing in the chat, and Katie has invited us to introduce ourselves in terms of the work status that we have and how much are we working and so forth. The question was, in terms of your missional work, are you compensated full-time, half-time? Are you split between churches? And there's been some responses there. Does anyone have a question you want to unmute and speak out? And Arlette, I want to make sure we acknowledge your role here. Do you want to look at the questions in the chat and bring those up? Would that be better for you?
I'm looking, thanks, Tom. I'm looking through the chat, and as I've gotten caught up, it seems as if everybody's indicating their full-time versus part-time status, unless there is a question.
We have a
Oh,
question
Julie.
from Sunny as well, when you're ready.
Okay, go ahead, Sonia. Let me read through these questions.
Hi.
Sunny.
Hi, Mary Kate. Thanks for the shout out there. So I think that the questions about full-time and part-time go to the core of being church planters, which is that most of us are from my attendance at these meetings, most of us are planting churches in intentionally poor or less funded communities. We're seeking out refugees or people who are unemployed, people who are on the outskirts, and therefore our core constituency for the congregations of our church planters are people who will probably never be able to afford full-time clergy by the kind of standards that we've had. And as you know, in Europe, all of us who went to Europe, almost all of us who went to Europe, took huge pay cuts from what we were getting in the United States. And we're really thankful that Church Pension Group lets us use our compensation from when we were in the United States as the core for our retirement pay. But as we go forward as church planters, this theme just keeps coming up that the people that we're creating congregations with are just not, as you can see in the other questions, are just not in a position to pay for full-time clergy under the traditional model, and probably looking at without getting into politics, looking at the United States, they're not going to be. They're going to continue to be the poorest and the least financially well off.
Thank you. If I could start just asking you, what's the typical kind of structure that you have as a church planter? Are you typically hired by a diocese? Are you clergy in a large parish that is planning a church as an adjunct to the parish. What are there some typical sort of kind of norms from what we could expect if we describe the career and kind of career structure for a church planter?
Yes to all those. And we actually have a couple on today who are even recipients of partnered funds and initiatives between denominations as well. So Cardinal daughter parish, Cardinal mother parish, daughter parish start, denomination, diocesan start, where the planter even functions as a member of the diocesan staff as a way of supporting them. But then there are also I'm going to get funding through the diocese, but the diocese has no investment in this. I'm completely dependent on the largesse of the General Convention budget and everything in between. Is that what you were asking?
Yes. And then in kind of the range of cases, who pays your pension assessments?
Curious if
Katie?
anyone on the screen wants to pipe up.
It really depends. Sorry, this is Julie. I'm in
Hi.
Minnesota. I recently left a church plant because I was burnt out. But I'm still invested in this process and really grateful to be here and learn about this. I was working with Spanish-speaking immigrants, probably one of the most vulnerable populations right now in our Episcopal Church. And I was working probably 2 or 3 jobs and being paid 3/4 time. And although I was working as hard as anyone in any church that was being paid full time, the amount of my pension reflected being paid 3/4 time. And so my retirement income is much more insecure than somebody who works and gets paid full time. And so these are the kinds of inequities I think that, the church needs to start addressing, because we are working full time as church planters, but we're not getting compensated full time. So therefore our retirement funding is not adequate to support us in retirement, at least in my experience. I can't speak for other people. So my church was paying my pension. We were kind of on our own. We were not a project of the diocese at all. I was mostly raising all of the funds to run this church through grants and other private donations, because the church itself could not support itself financially because they were immigrants. And so it's a really difficult job that requires a lot of financial, just kind of savvy. But there is this inequitable piece of retirement funding for us, for me anyway, in the church planting world. And I really believe that this is where, God is calling me to be, working with the most vulnerable, but that doesn't mean I should have to suffer in my retirement. So that's me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Others?
When we ask, Tim's got a great question here, but I'll jump in and just say, when we ask who is paying the pension, right? For some, it is they are technically employed by their diocese, or at least payroll is being run through their diocesan office. For some, a local parish has taken on that ministry. I've also encountered a good bit parishes and dioceses being reluctant, even if the grant funding is in place and the tithes or offerings are in place, reluctant to take on fiscal responsibility and accountability for a new project, because they're afraid that then that makes them accountable should all the money run out. And so I do see church planners kind of running around being like, oh my God, how am I going to get my pension paid? Because I don't have a fiscal agent to help me do this. And I think eventually that tends to get ironed out, but it's some weeping and gnashing of teeth beforehand.
So because I'm operating from my iPad, I either have to see the chat or I can see you. So I'm wondering, Arlette or Clayton, could you give me the questions that are coming up in the chat, please?
So Julie, I think you were able to voice your question. The next question that I see Well, let me ask, Tim, is the question tied to your comment? Is Tim still on? I
Yeah,
don't see him. Okay, there you are.
yeah. So, and it's connected to what Julie said, right? So
Mhm.
she expressed, you know, just because of how pensions work, like it is tied to a capitalist system, right? Of like what you pay into it, and there's governing laws around that control that. And so there only so much can be done. So, you know, given the constraints, I mean, this isn't CPG's problem so much as the larger church's problem. How we are compensating, how we're compensating our church planters, and whether or not we're paying for all the work that's being done by church planters or not. So there is that issue. My question is a slightly different but related tangent to Julie's, and it has to do with survivor benefits. So for example, like I'm 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 willing to work in my 30s and 40s in a church plant or redevelopment and make less money, knowing that or assuming, I guess, that, you know, I'm probably in my later years going to be working my top earning years, and so my hack will eventually work its way out. Um, but what happens if that planter or redeveloper dies in their 30s or 40s, and then their family survivor benefit is built on a hack that's artificially lower than what they probably would have made in another 5 years even. And so, I mean, this is important to me because it just happened to a colleague of mine here in Oklahoma. And so his wife and 3 kids, I mean, the kids benefit till 25 is wonderful. But basically the way now, I'll say this, when I was in seminary, my understanding was that if we died young, our spouse, and I'm a clergy couple, by the way, but that our spouse would get half of our salary. Um, and that's not exactly right. It's half of your hack minus the years, the months that you didn't work are thrown into that formula somewhere. So really, if you're 15 years in, it ends up being about a quarter of your hack instead of half. And so, you know, because it's as if you take early retirement, basically. But somebody who dies in their 30s and 40s isn't choosing early retirement. And so I'm wondering if we can't think of some other better way through a larger hardship benefit or just some exemption for those kinds of people. Uh, it's just it is a concern well, since you're here, I thought I would before you all.
Yeah, no, we'll take that under advisement. We looked at that seriously when we revamped the whole pension plan and reissued it in 2018. I think the survivor benefit, and I'll look to Clayton for this, is actually very, very rich compared to what most organizations would offer for survivors. But we kind of pushed it as far as we felt we could to be financially responsible, because we tested a lot of areas, including we do have a benefit in the pension plan that disproportionately benefits lower paid employees. So there's kind of a flat dollar amount aspect to the formula that, you know, when you work through it, disproportionately benefits lower paid employees. And we looked to see how far we could push that and some other benefits like survivor benefits, and tested that, stress tested the fund and said, how far can we push it without getting into an area that makes us uncomfortable in terms of the sustainability long-term of the fund. So we always look at these things, and we'll put it on the list for the next time we do a big look. But I think it was an area that got attention, and I think it's a very attractive benefit that, you know, a lot of outside of the Episcopal Church, a lot of people wouldn't have. But that doesn't mean that we can't take another look and do better if the financial circumstances of the fund ultimately justify it. We stress test the assets in the fund every year using very kind of sophisticated financial tools, and we look at like 10,000 different pathways of what the markets might do and inflation and everything. And then we have a heat map, and right now we're kind of, even though we're very well funded, we're kind of in the yellow, which says caution, but caution means we feel very good about the promises we've made. We'd be very cautious to enhance benefits at this point in time, given where the assets are. if we get into green as we stress test it and we sit there for a while so it's reliable, that would be a time where we could start looking at, is there a way to further enhance the benefits that we have. So that's an exercise we go through annually to see if there's more that we can do. But I hear you, and those are, obviously very tragic situations. I appreciate that. So we'll put that on the list. Thank you.
Tim, I just sent you my email address. The thing you're pointing to is we're aware of that, and there are several ways that we run the calculation in order to be, as Mary Kate says, not so far outside of our business ability, but I can shed a little more light on that. One of my best friends, also a clergy couple, his wife recently died, and so I worked very closely with him. It does get a little bit wonky as to how that is calculated, but I'm glad to review that. I sent you my email address. I did want to say I'm watching the chats as well, and one of the things, and Katie, you've heard me say this before, is that when it comes up with full-time and part-time, this church pension group for over 100 years put value judgments on how full or part-time your ministry was in your year of credited service as a church employee, and with our clergy pension plan revision that Mary Kate spearheaded for us to look again at how we manage our plan. We don't now make value judgments on, oh, well, you look like part-time, so you only get a part-time year of credited service. Again, pointing to the compensation is a church issue, not a CPG issue because of the way pensions work. But where we did have the ability to make a change is if you were a missionary, we would only give you like a quarter year of credited service. So there were missionaries in the church that worked for years and years and did not have one of those multipliers that is so important to a pension. And so that work was done, implemented in 2019. Years before that was worked on, but that is something that we were able to do that directly affects this group for when you're working not in a full-time position or you are bivocational. Your year of credited service is assuming that you are working and you are doing your year of ministry.
Thank you. Other questions? And I want to make sure that we know things. I asked a few questions, but things about you that you want us to be sure to know. And, I'm kind of reading the undercurrent here of the difficulties of being a church planter and, the emotional and physical toll that can take. So, anybody have any kind of perspective for me or anything you want to share on the health benefits we provide, use of the EAP, Credo and other sort of conferences that we offer? Any thoughts on what could make those more valuable to you or what you particularly value and would want us to change?
I'll say something that maybe relates to Credo. And honestly, I have not attended a Credo. That's on my to-do list.
Good.
But something that we're observing, we host twice a year, we host a Genesis gathering, generally for church planters and redevelopers, missional leaders. But we have discovered that we could easily double the size of these if we really wanted to. Church planters, ordained and lay people. And we've started to suspect that's partly because of people's interest in missional ministry. But it's also, we really suspect it's clergy and lay leaders and their loneliness. That their diocese tends, because of the levels of competition and just accountability to a diocesan bishop, their dioceses aren't places where they're getting the kind of support that they really need. And we're happy to welcome them into our events and wonder if there's actually something bigger going on that that Credo is maybe even better poised to help address. So that's not something that I would change. It's just kind of an emphasis on how important that rest and well-being and feeling of support is in this moment post-pandemic.
Thank you. And during the pandemic, we actually did virtual credos, which I think we call them credo conversations, which people found to be, I think, useful, the ones who participated. So we're looking at credo now, just doing a big review of all of our work in terms of programs and that we offer to see, you know, how do we do credo kind of even better? Does it need to be shorter so more people can attend? Do we have virtual and in-person options? The one thing that's difficult is to provide any kind of semblance of credo for lay employees, because most lay employees are in our defined contribution plans. There isn't money there to do extra programming with the clergy pension fund. You know, that's one of the things we've allowed for, using clergy assets. So that's a little more difficult. But I do think, I mean, there've just been various groups I've spoken to. I do think that perhaps looking at an affinity credo for church planters could be great, because even though our programming for credo tends to be the same, you know, we don't customize it for different groups, having a group of people coming together and going through the curriculum who have those kind of common experiences, I think could be useful. Another group, and I don't know if there are enough of them, but I was at a group of young clergy under 40, and one of them, his first job was being sent by his bishop into 2 parishes that were merging. And wow, I thought that's baptism by fire. and to hear him speak, it really was. But I was thinking, are there enough people who are serving churches that are merging? Because that's a really special kind of ministry as well. So I think that there are areas where, with these changes in the church, there are ways we can be helpful to bring together people who have common interests and experiences to share as part of our, you know, that fits into the curriculum that, again, is kind of appropriate for our role in the church.
Thank you.
May I reflect very briefly on what I think I'm hearing here in and maybe invite you to consider how we might partner in a particular way, Mary Kate. I hear through your really great illustrations and examples, and from prior conversations I've had with your staff, that you're being really good, responsible stewards of the assets and the intentions and the values of the Episcopal Church at large, and that on your board you have a fair representation of the church, trying to be responsible and very ably being responsible to the commitments that you've made to clergy, lay leaders, and their families. Many of us on the call today are tending networks of folks who are quite unlike the bishops that oversee their work. These are people really on the front edge, and they're really risk takers. They're willing to sacrifice personal income, personal livelihood. I mean, I could not do the work that I do today were it not for people who have made tremendous personal sacrifices because they really believe in the future of what we're doing, and they're willing to make those sacrifices right now. So my point is this, that we're standing in this place of tension, maybe even in a social field where some of us are anticipating quite a different spring from the last summer we remember in our halcyon days. And we're planting seeds for a future that is quite unlike what the church knows what to do with at this point. And we're out there in that field and we're taking risks. We're planting the seed we're given, and even seed that we find in other places. And in many cases, I mean this in the most generous way, we're watching responsible, non-risk-taking people, not CPG, but other leaders in the church, actively eating the seed corn, which we might actually use in the future, by liquidating buildings and property that we don't know what to do with anymore, either because they're in transitioning neighborhoods or because there was white flight that emptied the building before we got there. But I'm inviting you in a two-way invitation here. One is, could you take our descriptions of these realities with you into the larger conversations you're having church-wide about how do we anticipate a very different spring, a need for a different crop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out into the world and all of our fiscal responsibility and stewardship and so forth, but also be thinking with us about how we advocate in our respective networks around better stewardship of what I'm calling seed corn, the pledges and offerings of all the widows and people who've tithed for hundreds of years before us, whose offerings made these buildings and properties available to us. And just because they're not in the right dominant culture neighborhood today, we're really quick to sell them.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, that money could actually make the contributions necessary to pension fund such that it would make it worthwhile for a risk-taking church planter to accept lower pay, knowing that in the end, retirement's going to take care of them.
Thank you. Well, one of the exciting things about my job, and I know for Clayton and Arlette, even though Clayton's about to kind of sail off into the sunset, notwithstanding my arm twisting, one of the most exciting things about what we do is that we talk to a lot of people in the church because of our jobs, and people like you all. There's nothing that gives me more pleasure than to kind of convey concerns of one group to others. And as we have conversations with, I'm sure, with our new presiding bishop and his leadership team and others, we will take these conversations with us. And as we write up reports and report back to General Convention on our work, and that these conversations will be part of that. So I'm so excited about the work that you all do. I think it's absolutely critical to doing the work of Christ in the world and growing our church. And but for the risk takers and jumping into that ship, as you say, then we probably shouldn't have optimism about our church, but because of the work that you and others do, we really do. So we want to be there to support you and to be allies and do what we can. So thank you.
Thank you. Any last words from anyone? Question you didn't get to ask? Our time is up. Some of you didn't speak up at all. Clayton?
I just want to say one thing. As I retire, I have enjoyed immensely the few times that I have been able to talk to this group, and it enlivens my ministry here at this place. You are who we are at our best, and I am so glad and privileged to have been a part of the conversation of the Church Planters group. So thank you very much for what you have each given me.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for that.
And I would like to think that we can come back to you as our thinking on this point of view evolves, because this is kind of a starter conversation, but we're not even diving into that work until January. And I'm sure that we will have a lot of more specific questions for you and your lives as church planners that will be instructive for us. So with your permission, I'd love to come back and or reach out to individuals of you in that for further insights.
We welcome that. Yeah.
And I think we'd say if there's any particular data that we're able to collect on your behalf, just, casual surveys of our folks and employment status or question or whatever it is, let us know.
We will. Yeah.
They have to submit their grant reports anyway, so might as well.
Yeah, no, that would be extremely helpful, because we didn't have a chance to delve into the nitty-gritty today, but that would be a great way to generate that information. Thank you.
And we can be very good listeners too. So if you'd like us to show up and listen, we're good at that. Yeah.
Well, as I say, this is going to be an iterative process. As we come out with a point of view, we're going to want to test it. So we would love to use you as a sounding board.
Thank you. We're honored. Well, let me say to all of you joining us today, we're going to turn off the recording in a moment, but we're super grateful that you joined us and that you invested yourselves and your stories in this emerging possibility in this partnership between Church Planting Ministry Redevelopment and the Church Pension Group. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Go in peace.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful work.